As one of the last of the true gamers, I follow industry news with some regularity. Recently, in between the countless stories of Microsoft, Ubisoft, the Embracer Group, and Warner Brothers ruining everything, a story came across my transom. It was about a controversy emerging over some cosmetic items, specifically the far northern attire from the online multiplayer RPG Final Fantasy XIV. Now, I have never played this game. The last Final Fantasy I played was 10, and since then I've kind of fallen off that type of game, and I definitely don't have any interest in MMORPGs. Even so, I don't think that matters because I suspect this controversy would have happened with any particular genre, and probably with many other mediums, which it actually did with Disney movies. In brief, an organization called the Saami Council claimed that FF14's far northern attire was based on traditional clothing that has deep cultural significance for the Sami, a group of indigenous people from northern Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Russia, a region known as Sápmi. According to the council, these designs are the cultural and intellectual property of the Sami people, and Square Enix was violating their rights by using it for a costume in a game without permission. If you've watched my videos for any length of time, you know that the land back movement and indigenous rights in general are something that I care about and I try to lend my support to as best I can. I'm still woefully undereducated on these topics, but I recognize their importance. That's why it pains me to make this confession. When I first read this story, my immediate reaction was to roll my eyes and say, "This is a pressing issue, come on." I know, I talk a good lefty game on here, but I am just as prone to blowing people off as any right-winger sometimes. But, I didn't stop there, because here was the other half to my dismissal. Why do the Sami people expect to have their cultural regalia respected when, like, Catholics have had to put up with demonic or sexy nuns since forever? Catholic outfits are just as culturally important to that religion, but no influencer that I'm aware of has made a similar left-wing social justice push to protect their cultural property. So I guess to distill it down, my question was, if that style of dress is the Sami's intellectual property, then aren't nun outfits the intellectual property of Catholics in the same way, and oughtn't we call for them to be equally protected if we're being consistent? Now, will it surprise you to learn that when I said that, I didn't know shit about fuck when it came to the Sami? I knew they were indigenous to the tippy top of Scandinavia and were culturally distinct from the Germanic Scandinavians who had colonized the coastal areas further south. Other than that, I just assumed they were just another subset of Europeans doing Europe-y things very Europely. So, realizing this gap in my knowledge, I thought to myself, before I tell the good people of Sápmi how to live their lives, maybe I should, learn about them? It's a wild idea, I know, but just go with me here. Now, I'm not the right guy to give you a deep dive on the Sami people, but in brief, here's the gist of what I learned. The Sami people have roots in northern Scandinavia stretching back to at least the 2nd millennium BCE. So when Egyptian pharaoh Ramses III was fighting the Sea Peoples and weathering the Bronze Age collapse, the Sami were already doing their thing in Sápmi, possibly for centuries. There's some debate about when and how the Sami came to be a distinct people group, but genetic and linguistic evidence seems to affirm their deep historic ties to that land, no matter how you slice it. For a long time, the Germanic peoples that settled southern Scandinavia didn't have a ton of contact with the Sami people, despite occupying what we would now consider the same countries. But beginning roughly around the 1500s CE, the Sami began to feel the squeeze as their Finnish, Swedish, and Norwegian neighbors began to encroach on their ancestral lands and hunt their reindeer. The Sami would negotiate with various local authorities and royal courts, often agreeing to pay taxes or tributes, but by the 1800s, the same colonial soul sickness that had fueled the Age of Empire came upon the Germanic Scandinavians too. What began with territorial disputes as Finnish farmers slashed and burned Sami woodlands progressed to the Swedish royalty straight up stealing their land and later forcing the Sami to work in the mines under threat of severe punishment. In Russia, Sami who refused to give up their nomadic lifestyles were placed in concentration camps by Stalin's regime. And to come full circle to my original question, the Sami were victims of an extended campaign to wipe out their cultural traditions and turn them into quote-unquote civilized Christians. In the 1700s, it became official Norwegian policy to force the Sami to assimilate into Norwegian Christian practices. In echoes of the horrors of Canada and the United States, Sami were pushed into boarding schools where they were forced to abandon their language and their traditions. Laws were created compelling the Sami to give up their traditional musical instruments and attend a Christian church. In one incident, a man named Anders Nilsson was burned alive for refusing. So, in short, basically every rotten thing white Europeans did to the indigenous people of the Americas, the Caribbean, and Africa, they also did to the Sami, from forced labor, forced assimilation, all the way up to environmental destruction of their homeland. And, like with atrocities committed against the Taino, the First Nations, the Igbo, and others, much of this horror was motivated by Christianity. So that kind of makes me a huge asshole for blowing off Sami concerns and asking, yeah, but what about the nuns? Even though it was Protestants doing the bulk of the persecution in Scandinavia by the 17th century, nuns do represent Christianity broadly, a Christianity that was used to exploit and oppress the Sami people. And the reason I wanted to make this video is because I think my original question, while certainly unkind and uninformed, is all too common among a lot of people, particularly white people who often think of history as this dead thing. This dry list of dates and genealogies and wars and far-off places that don't really have any material impact on our day-to-day lives. I can't tell you how many white people, myself included when I was younger, believe that the wheel of history has stopped spinning, that we all just ended up where we ended up, and our job is to look forward and make the most of it, not look backwards at how things got to be the way they are today, and certainly not concern ourselves with righting wrongs committed by our great-grandparents. But of course, history is very much alive, very much an active force in the world, and the crimes of yesteryear aren't over and done with. They are ongoing. They are pervasive. They wound and kill. If you go to the website for the Saami Council, you'll discover that they aren't just a bunch of scolds trying to make your chocobo games woke. They are vigorously trying to defend the rights and dignity of their people against the same forces that are ruining the rest of our lives. They have to fight to defend their language and cultural practices from erasure because nationalist colonial attitudes still persist in Europe, particularly among the far-right parties surging in elections this very year. They have to defend their ancestral lands against destructive resource extraction perpetrated by these same kinds of corporations polluting the oceans, strip mining coal country, and dumping waste in the global south. Like, yeah, in a vacuum, it's tempting to wonder if it's really such a horror to use traditional Sami designs in a fantasy game for a bit of flavor. But let's think back to the Sami's experiences with their Germanic neighbors. Everyone around them suddenly decided that the hay in the swamps which fed the Sami's reindeer didn't belong to them, and they just took it. They decided that the land the Sami hunted and lived on for hundreds or thousands of years didn't belong to them, and they just took it. They decided that Sami music didn't belong to them, and they tried to destroy it. They decided that the Sami religion didn't belong to them, and they tried to destroy that. They decided that the Sami language didn't belong to them, and they tried to silence it. So when the Saami Council said of the far northern attire in Final Fantasy XIV, this is not about sensitivity or whether the depiction is appropriate, these elements are Sami cultural property, I think I actually get it now. It's not about the depiction, and arguably, it's not even about the outfits. It's about stealing from an indigenous group who, for the last 500 years, has constantly been told that they don't get to own anything, that everything they have is for other people to enjoy, exploit, or dispose of. Let's not forget that the age of colonialism was buttressed by, among other philosophies, a belief that indigenous land was either empty or being wasted by quote-unquote primitives who weren't maximizing its value. The doctrine of terra nullius was a justification for white Europeans to see something that wasn't theirs and just take it because they knew better how to use it. And that doctrine, that philosophy, that instinct never really died. You can see it in places like museums where culturally significant artifacts aren't returned to the people they were stolen from because, well, they don't have the proper facilities to protect it. You see it in places like the acres and acres of government-owned land that isn't returned to the people who'd been kicked off of it because it has strategic value. But also, as a white guy, even one with so-called good politics sometimes, I can assure you that this doctrine lives inside me like a congenital heart defect. When guys like me bristle at being told that's not for you by an indigenous person, by a black person, or anyone else on the margins, I think that bristling comes from the assumption I have that I know what's best and I'm entitled to enjoy any damn thing I please if it's within my reach. And I think this gets to the heart of why it's quote-unquote okay to appropriate nun costumes but not Sami attire. I think a model of equality that begins and ends with everyone should be able to do the exact same things is insufficient here. Because as historical actors, the Catholic Church and the Sami are not even in the same neighborhood. From almost the very beginning, the Catholic Church and later the Protestant Church have been engaged in conquest, colonization, and cultural annihilation. For nearly 2,000 years, Christianity has taken and taken and taken, torturing and killing non-Christians and blessing the efforts of tyrant kings and warlords to do likewise. And that's to say nothing of their ongoing efforts to protect and enable child predators. To be clear, I'm not saying any individual Catholic or Protestant person supports or condones these things, only that the church leadership organizations have been and continue to be guilty of this at the highest levels. In comparison, the Sami have been taken and taken and taken from, tortured and killed for being non-Christians or for trying to escape slavery and exploitation. This is why I think it's perfectly reasonable to lampoon one organization and respect the traditions of the other. The Catholic Church occupies a seat of global power over others, making them a valid target for satire and scorn. You will always be punching up at that organization. The Sami, on the other hand, have been stolen from again and again because they have no institutional power. So belittling them further just makes you a petty asshole. Or rather, it made me a petty asshole. To wrap this up, I hope it's clear that this isn't some holier-than-thou video essay where I scold you for not knowing about the thing that I just learned yesterday. Not that lefties would ever do a thing like that. Rather, I wanted to walk you through a colonialist reaction that I had, and then my attempts to work through that colonialism to maybe recalibrate my brain a little. Maybe you had a similar thought about this story, or maybe you had a similar thought about some other article you read or some discourse you saw go down. If I had any kind of thesis for this video, it's that we should cultivate a posture of curiosity when it comes to situations like this. We won't always begin with a kind thought, but we can at least practice our curiosity and not stop at the unkind thought. And as we follow that thread of curiosity, we can be on the lookout for power structures and systems at work that we hadn't considered before. History isn't just a bunch of shit that happened a long time ago. It's a living entity shaping our lives every day, and we have a responsibility to tame that beast to prevent it from trampling other people on the margins. Luckily, many of those people can tell us exactly how to tame it. We just have to listen.